Welcome back to She Said What, the podcast. Today I am here with the amazing Jordan Davey. Welcome to the couch.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Caitlin. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Loving it. So good. Finally, good to meet you in person.
I can't believe that when you said that in our messages and you were like, can't wait to meet you in person. I was like, what do you mean?
But you're one of those people that I feel like I've known for years and years and years and years.
Yeah. Maybe we have met in a past life. Weird that we were also almost neighbours for a few years as well. Like when you lived in Yarraville and then I lived in Yarraville.
Crazy.
Anyway, sidetrack. For those who don't know you, who are you and what do you do?
My name's Jordan. I'm a holistic health practitioner and I help people heal.
Yeah.
I like to say I help people heal when doctors can't. So usually I'm seeing people that have been through the centralized system and they've been let down or they've been abandoned or they've been made to feel stupid and gaslit. And I'm helping them find the root cause of what's going on. And I really like to think I'm as holistic as possible. So I feel like you and I are very aligned with our philosophies, but I don't want to miss anything. So I want to think about their mindset, their breathing mechanics, trauma, emotions, their environment, their blood work, their biochemistry, their training, their hydration, their nutrition, like all of it. So yeah, that's me.
How did you even find this path? How did you get into it?
So I guess it started like I was always pretty, intelligent. I was in the smart class at school, but I was also a little shit. Like I was probably the worst in the year level, always getting in trouble. So I was in the smart class, but I was also in I think it was called the anger management class, I think. So I had the yin and yang down pat. And I just pretty much cruised through school, always got good grades, but never really applied myself to anything apart from psychology and health in year 11 and 12. And then at that time, my best friend, she had really bad depression and probably spent like just over a year literally counseling her every single night. We'd fall asleep on the phone to each other for like an hour and a half. Yeah. And then one day I got told, my parents were at school and I'm like, oh, fuck. And they came in and they said that she'd attempted suicide. She'd swallowed like 25 sleeping pills or something, which was heavy as. I didn't process it at the time. But in saying that, I pretty much didn't go to school for like 3 or 4 months and I just couldn't get out of bed. So I was super depressed, didn't even know what it was. Obviously I knew what it was because I was studying it, but I didn't know what it was in practicality because I'm like, I'm not suicidal. I'm not thinking that it's the end of the world. I just have no energy and no motivation and just feel like a slug. Yeah. But I was also burning myself out because I was drinking and I was playing footy and I was playing basketball, overtraining, like burning the candle at both ends. So that was probably my first experience of helping someone. And now I look back at it and I'm like, I definitely helped delay what was coming, but for her, it was inevitable that it was going to get there. She needed medication because she had that much of a biochemical imbalance. So that was like my first experience of it. So that motivated me to do psych after school. So I studied psych, finished that, studied neuroscience as well. And then I'm like, okay, I want to be a doctor. And then went into biomed. Yeah. And I was playing footy at Williamstown VFL. So like playing pretty high level basketball at that time as well. And had always been into like training side of things. But at that time, then I got all of my health issues. So I had really bad anxiety. I had really bad brain fog. Like I really struggled to put sentences together and be able to think clearly, which is crazy to think about now because now I don't shut up and I've got a podcast and I just talk all the time. But there was a stage where I just couldn't speak. And the anxiety was more probably body related as well. I used to get GERD. I used to get a lot of tightness of breath, a lot of irritability, and then a lot of sleep issues as well. I was on Roaccutane, and then I had like a number of other things pop up. So that led me down to the path of going to a doctor, and then the doctor told me I was like pre-diabetic or something. But that's all he gave me. He didn't give me anything else. My liver enzyme markers were all elevated. My kidney markers were all elevated as well. My white blood cells were flatlined, and that's what usually happens when you're on Roaccutane. And I was on a really high dose of Roaccutane as well. And it turns out I started working with one of my like mates who moved up to Queensland who was a gut health coach, and he looked at my bloods. He's like, bro, there's so much going on here. And he went through all my bloods, and I'm like, oh my God, this is sick. This is probably like 4 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. And then I'm like, yeah, I want to get into doing what he does. So I did a full gut protocol, had candida and yeast overgrowth. I had leaky gut as well, had heaps of nutrient deficiencies, liver enzyme markers were elevated, hypercortisolemia, so I was stressed out, and my immune system was fried. So I went through like a big gut protocol through that. At that time, I was like having my awakening, I guess, and understanding what the world was like and what medicine was like. And I'm like, fuck this, I don't want to do that. I don't want to become a doctor. The year of biomed I did do at uni was all focused around medication and focused around disease, and none of it had anything to do with healing or thinking about like a root cause approach. So at that time, I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to do my own thing. So I started following what he was doing with gut health and blood work, got a few mentors, started learning that, started doing some functional medicine courses, went to the Institute of Health, and then just been a health nuffy and nerd ever since.
Just geeking out.
Yeah, geeking out. That was probably a long answer.
No, I love it though.
But that's how I got to where I am now.
I feel like a lot of people in this industry have found it through their own health issues.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
And I think like with that, it's the story of the wounded healer, and people that have been through it themselves, they can empathize, but they also are passionate enough to dig deep. And I think that's like when I'm mentoring other coaches and other practitioners, that's what I say to them at the start. I'm like, look, there's so much you're going to learn. Like I spend hours and hours every single day, and I still feel like I barely know anything. And you see someone like Jack Cruz, who's the biggest nuffy of all time, like knows probably everything that you could think of, and he still thinks he doesn't know enough. And there's obviously levels and there's dynamics to it. So you need to be passionate to be able to learn, but you also need to have the passion to be like, okay, it's enough to know this information. There's a lot of very intelligent people out there that understand a lot about biochemistry and about the body and how the whole system works, but they don't know how to speak to someone or empathize with someone or actually communicate with someone, because it doesn't matter how good of a protocol or how good of a plan you have. If I'm working with you and you've got really severe like mental health issues or cognitive issues, or you're low dopamine, it's going to be very hard for you to be like, here's a list of 20 things I need you to do for the next 4 weeks and I need you to stick at it.
Yeah.
So it's about being able to be really good with people and also have curiosity around who you're dealing with, because every single person's different and every single person is so nuanced from the physical, mental, emotional and spiritual level that you need to be able to like fully commit to it. You can't just half-ass it, and you can't just look at it, which is, I guess, an issue that's in more of the functional health space and naturopathy as well. Everyone sort of finds what they love. And an example of this is like mold. Like everyone used to think mold was the root cause of everything over the last few years. So then they become tunnel visioned and they focus purely on that. And with naturopathy, they're looking at it from, okay, what tincture or what herbs can I give you to heal X, Y, and Z? The actual philosophy of what they're doing is the same as what the centralized system's doing with medication. It's just that they're using a natural form or a plant form rather than a synthetic form. So it's still not going to the root cause. And you and I have spoken about this and talked about what the hierarchy of health is. The root cause has to be your environment and on a quantum level, alongside with your psyche and your mindset and your emotions and how that dynamic fits together.
Let's break that down for anyone that's like, what the actual fuck just came out of Jordan's mouth? Yeah. When we're talking about environment on a quantum level, hierarchy, what does that actually mean?
So we need to think about on the most minute level, so as deep as we go, but also on the macro level as well. If you think about the universe, inside of our cells, when we go deep, 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 deep to the atomic level and then the subatomic level, we understand there's electrons and protons, which create an electro charge in the body and in the world. So, and the universe. So on that macro level, we're black holes and we think about the sun and we think about the dynamic with all the planets, that is still mirroring what's happening on a cellular level or on the atomic level within us. Cool. So we think about protons and electrons, positive and negative charge creates a battery. So that's a nice, simple way to think about it. And our body needs to have the the right balance of protons and electrons, you can think about it from like the as above, so below metaphor with the yin and yang, in order to create polarity, which creates energy within us. Yes. So when you think about that, we used to be constantly connected to the earth. We used to constantly be in the sun or in shade and receiving sun from the reflection of the infrared light off the plants around us. So we were always getting the feedback from the earth, and the earth has its own energy, and it's called the Schumann resonance. It resonates at 7.83 hertz, which actually is what our alpha wave in the brain resonates at. So when you think about those main brain waves, alpha, beta, theta, gamma, delta, alpha is where we're really in that like regulated, flowy, creative state. And that's what we were constantly in before we invented shoes and before we invented artificial lights and before we invented indoors. So when we think about that period of time that we were in, we were like, the chronic health issues that we see today didn't exist because they couldn't exist, because we were constantly connected to what we needed in order to generate health and energy in the body. Now, of course, there was disease, and of course there was like still severe injuries, and like people obviously still died, and a lot of deaths, and the life expectancy back then was reduced because of infant mortality and what was happening with pregnancy and mothers at the time. But ultimately, like, people weren't getting autoimmune conditions, people weren't getting cardiovascular disease, people weren't getting cancer in anywhere near the numbers as what we are now. So that in itself just tells us that as we've disconnected from nature and our environments had this massive change, our health has deteriorated and been affected as a result. So the earth gives us energy through the Schumann resonance, magnetism. The sun gives us energy through the photoelectric effect, which is sunlight. And then the third leg, of the three-legged stool is water. So water allows this like quantum process, and there's all fancy terms and names and that. And it's fun to talk about it in those terms, but if you really simplify it, which is what we all need to do, the practicality of it is so easy. But water allows for this quantum process to happen, and it's through something called the fourth phase of water, which isn't liquid. Yeah, easy. So easy stands for exclusion zone, and it can also be called structured water. So there's like a number, and coherent water. There's like a number of different terms for it, but it's referring to that fourth phase, which isn't vapor, it isn't liquid, and it isn't ice. So it's like this gel-like substance that's in our body and allows the passing of electrons and pretty much all the magic in the mitochondria to happen. So we've got water, we've got magnetism, and we've got sun. And in order for us to be healthy, we need those three to be in balance and to be in unison with each other. And like I said before, we don't have magnetism anymore because we sleep disconnected from the earth. We wear shoes, we're inside all the time, and we're around non-native EMF, which impacts the magnetic field in our body. Yeah. The sun, we avoid that like the plague, especially here in Australia. I know we're going to get into this.
Oh my God.
But we lather up, we wear sunnies, we wear hats, we cover up, and through that process, we completely disconnect from all the energy that we're getting from that photoelectric effect. And then water, in order for us to create this exclusion zone water, or this fourth phase of water, we actually do that ourselves. We don't drink it. You can drink what they call structured water, but we are the ones that create that structured water. And we do that in our mitochondria. And how we do that is by using the cytochromes in the mitochondria that collect the infrared light from our environment and make this exclusion zone water within us. So that whole dynamic sits at the baseline of the pyramid in terms of health. So if that isn't in place, then you're never going to be able to achieve things. And no one, or very few people in the space, are looking at that dynamic. They're looking at it further up the pyramid or further down the stream. So they're looking at like the biochemistry. So they're looking at macros, they're looking at micronutrients, they're looking at minerals. Then they're looking at hormones. Then they're looking at, even further up from there, they're looking at like deficiencies and how the liver's working and how the gallbladder's working and how the gut as a whole is working. And then it just goes further and further up from there. And like the real surface level stuff is like talking about calorie counting and talking about if it fits your macros and looking at like high intensity interval training as the answer. And obviously, I mean, not even in that zone is then the pharmaceutical side of things, which is just like, here's your issue, let's just cover it up and good luck to you.
And here's some other things to cover up the side effects that you're getting from that thing.
Yeah, exactly. Well. So you ask a client when you go through their health assessment with them, you'll ask them like, what are you on any medications? And like, yep, I'm on this one. Like, how long you been on that one for? Oh, I've been on that one for 5 years. You on any more? Yeah, I've been on this one. How long you been on that for? 4 years. Yeah. This one, 3, 2, 1. They got 5 medications that started off with one because the first one that they were on caused issues upstream or in other areas of the body that meant they needed another medication to mask that symptom.
Yeah.
And so on and so on and so on.
It's fucked. When I had my Crohn's medication, they gave me injections and then they're like, your body's probably going to want to fight against this. So here's a tablet to suppress your immune system even more so that doesn't happen.
Yep.
Crazy.
Okay,
coming back to the foundational thing. So we have easy water, we have light, water, magnetism.
Yep.
As the foundational period, the foundations for health. Mm-hmm. And you're saying that if people are focusing on macros and micronutrients and all of that, they're actually kind of missing what's happening at the base level.
It goes so much deeper than that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm really big on like understanding that you may not get to your dream or your goal or your objective straight away, but if you can slowly move the needle, and if that starts off with you counting your calories because it means you're going to stop eating really shitty foods that we all know are bad for us, then that's a good thing. So if that's where you're at on your journey, don't feel like
don't stop doing that.
Exactly, don't stop doing that or don't feel overwhelmed. But like I said before, understanding that dynamic, the simplicity of it is so good because all you need to do is replicate nature. And like I said, the science behind it is very complex. The interactions are very complex, but the application of it is so simple. And it starts with the way that you wake up. And the way that you wake up, you have to go outside and you have to see the sun as soon as you wake up. Can't lay in bed and rot and check your phone and doom scroll. Can't go inside and stuff around and look outside and see that it's windy or see that it's cold or see that it's raining and be like, oh no, I'm not going to do that today. The body doesn't understand what time it is. Just because you understand what time it is doesn't mean that the cells in the body understand. And every single morning, the sun acts as our reset button for what's called our circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is a 24-hour cycle that the body goes through that determines all of the quantum processes, but more importantly, all of the signals to send and to receive within the body. So you got to think about, and that's what I was saying, how complex this is. There are so many biochemical reactions happening in the body.
Oh my God.
Like biochemistry is so overwhelming to learn and get into because there's just so much. There's so many enzymes working. There's so many different nutrients. There's so many different minerals. And we just take that for granted. When in reality, that is like such a finite and such a, I guess, like specific operation that's going on that anything that's happening outside of that is going to cloud the way that those signals get sent and get received. So in order for them to be timed to perfection, which is what we need to essentially yoke what's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Now the suprachiasmatic nucleus, fancy term, essentially it's just the clock in the brain. Yeah. So it sits in the hypothalamus and it sends the signals to the rest of the peripheral clocks that we have. So the lungs have their own clock, the stomach has its own clock, the immune system has its own clock, the skin cells, etc., and tells them what time it is. Now, this thing runs higher or faster than what's happening in the other clocks in the body. So it needs to be very specific in terms of what it's dialed to, because if it's off just by the slightest bit, all those other clocks become off. And what happens then is that the signals that are getting sent and received in the body become incoherent, which leads to oxidative stress, which leads to inflammation, which leads to chronic disease. Now, thinking about earlier from an ancestral perspective, we always had that very specific timing happening within the body.
Yeah.
And that was super important because that timing mechanism, like I said, is controlling what's happening in the balance. The way it works is it has to run faster than those other clocks in the body, the same way that a GPS system is getting a signal from a satellite that's running a fraction faster than the clocks back here on Earth to keep time because of the relativity of it.
Yes.
So that is what's happening as soon as we wake up in the morning. So if we don't get that, if we go on our phone, if we stay inside, if we don't get outside, we're not getting that signal. Now that's really important because when that signal goes through, like I said, all those reactions begin. We also get the stimulation of urocanic acid in the skin and filigran in the skin as well from the infrared light exposure, which is what prepares us for UV exposure later in the day. So the urocanic acid is actually protective against UV. So it protects the cells from any DNA damage from the UV. So it's essentially priming the skin to deal with the light that's coming later in the day. So that's why it's not just important to get your eyes in the early morning sun, but also to get your skin in the game as well. And if you think about the biohacking perspective with red light machines, what they're doing is they're doing a fraction of what the sun's providing you within that early morning window. So I think it's pretty limited at the moment. The sun's coming up here about 6:45.
So late.
It's only about half an hour before that window sort of shuts off, because the UV shows up currently, because we're in summer, I think around half an hour to 45 minutes after the sun rises. So once that UV's shown up, you pretty much lose the power of that effect. So, and you'll notice this, like anecdotally, I've had so many of my clients just tell me, literally just by getting that morning sun on their skin, they don't burn when they go in the sun that later that day, or their tolerance to the sun, they don't get as hot, they don't get as red, and their skin is able to withstand it. So that by itself is already a massive reason why you want to do it. You also want to do it because you're getting the stimulation of dopamine and you're getting the stimulation of cortisol as well. Cortisol gets a bad rap. It's the stress hormone it's referred to, but it is what gives us that stress response, which is a good thing on the acute setting and at the right time of the day, because it wakes us up. And it's also turning off the melatonin secretion that we've been having throughout the night in order to get into sleep. So that process in the morning is vital. It is the most important thing that you can do for your health, more important than any other decision you make, because if that doesn't happen, if that clock's not primed, everything else is going to be a mess for the rest of the day. So that's like the really important aspect of how you start your day. And then from there, as the day progresses and as the sun begins to change the light frequencies that it's emitting, where it goes from the infrared spectrum into the more the more narrow lens spectrum of like 0 to 400 nanometer light, where we're seeing UV, then we're getting a wide, my God, a wide spectrum. This is what happens when I try and go too fast. My lips can't keep up with my head. We're getting a wide spectrum of the light frequencies that are coming in. Now, the light isn't consistent and it fluctuates, and based on those fluctuations, they each serve their purpose in the way that we're receiving that light. So as we see UV light show up, that's when we begin to think about that early morning window for our hormone secretion in the morning. So if you've got hormonal imbalances, or if you're working with someone who's trying to fix your hormones and they're not telling you to get as much of your skin in the sun between sort of sunrise to like at the moment here in Victoria, like 9:30, 10 a.m., then you're missing out on a massive opportunity to actually balance out your hormones and reset this issue for good. So that window is vital, because then as the day progresses, the benefits begin to change and we start to see the UVB show up, which is what's stimulating something called POMC, which is pro-opioid melanocortin. It's essentially like, think of it like a massive bit of meat at the butcher, and it can get carved up into different slices of meat or different cuts that serve a different purpose. So for example, it can get sliced up into alpha MSH, which is what helps us to synthesize melanin. It can get carved up into like beta endorphin, which is actually an opioid function. So it's essentially what painkillers are playing on, that receptor. And that's the reason why you feel good when you go in the sun, because you're getting a feel-good chemical be released. So just by that alone, it would tell us that UVB light that we get from the sun through POMC is enough enough evidence to say that the sun is good for us. We wouldn't be programmed and we wouldn't have a chemical reaction that creates a feel good sensation if something wasn't good for us. That's natural. Obviously, like the synthetic side with like drugs, that's a whole nother game.
I'm like, cocaine feels good.
I know. So that's super important, and it's also then obviously synthesizing vitamin D, which has so many different functions throughout the body. And then as the day progresses and the intensity of the UV begins to diminish, we then get the wind down and we get the change in light spectrum again to more of that infrared ratio compared to the UV, which then tells our body that it's time to begin to wind down for night. And then obviously as the sun goes down, the way our biochemistry and the way that our body should exist is in a state of darkness or limited light that we get from the moon, for example. Like last night, the moon was actually quite bright. So we do have a little bit of tolerance for light at night. But when there's a full moon, the term lunacy or lunatic is from a full moon, because the energy is getting reflected back to the earth at night, which has more of a stimulatory effect on people.
Yes, because it's blue light.
Exactly.
Schroeder was talking about this in something.
So that in itself tells us that there's probably an issue with blue light at night. Now, this is a whole rabbit hole, and we could literally speak about this for 3 or 4 hours, the issues around it. But to keep it simple and to keep it short, blue light isn't always bad. It is in the sun. It happens in the morning to midday. It wakes us up, and it has an important function. And it's actually stimulating ACTH, which is adrenal corticotropin hormone. Some of these words are so hard to pronounce. And that is playing on the cortisol rhythm that's happening in the body. So cortisol and melatonin, they're yoked. Melatonin, everyone knows as the nighttime neurotransmitter. And we actually synthesize the building blocks for melatonin during the day from getting sunlight as well.
This is why you get sleepy after a big day in the sun.
Exactly. It's why you sleep better from being in the sun.
Yeah.
So melatonin and cortisol are very tightly linked with one another. When melatonin increases, cortisol has to go down. And in order for melatonin to go down, and again, there's variation and nuance here, because some people are so flatlined that they have no melatonin, that there's already issues around that. So the cortisol pathway impacts that as well. But essentially, blue light is stimulatory to the body. So anytime we're getting it, we're getting the ACTH being affected and being stimulated, which is then causing excess amounts of cortisol in the body, which is increasing and essentially stimulating the nervous system. So we're going into more of a sympathetic dominant state within the nervous system. Now, the vast majority of people are around blue light all day. If they're working in an office, if they're on their phone all the time, if they're by their computer, whatever their setup's like, if they're inside and they're around technology, they're around blue light. Now, there's a really easy hack that you can do, and it's called open up a window or open up a door. And just by doing that, the natural light that's coming through from outside will actually offset the very strong ratio of blue light that you're getting. There's other things that you can do. You can download Iris for your laptop. You can get blue light glasses like I've got. These are the daytime ones, yellow lens, and they're reducing the blue light spikes from all the lights around. You can do some hacks on your phone to get the red screen mode set as well. But essentially, blue light, like I said, it's not bad all the time, but in our modern society, it is one of the biggest reasons that we're in such a health crisis. So it's vital that you limit your exposure to blue light, and it's especially vital that you limit it at night. Now, the LED lights, and this is an interesting story in itself, the LED lights that we get, actually, it goes even further back than that. It's like a CIA operation that happened, and they copied it from what the casinos were doing in Vegas. And what the casinos were doing in Vegas to get people addicted to the slots was that they were shutting off all the natural light, and obviously all the machines were emitting blue light, and then all the lights around were emitting blue light. So it created a low dopamine state for people that were inside, because of the way that it broke away the vitamin A receptors, which meant that their skin receptors, which also have melanopsin, which is falling inside the pattern of the light detection.
Yeah.
And I'm crapping on a bit here. But essentially, through that process of seeing what the mafia were doing in Vegas in the casinos, the CIA are like, oh, maybe we can use light as a way to control people. And through that process, that is where the blue light story is sort of born in terms of controlling people, and why this is very conspiracy theory side of things.
Take your tinfoil hat off.
But why all the modern day technology and devices all are really strong in the blue light spectrum, because they're able to essentially mind control you through that.
Yeah.
Because of the impact it has on dopamine.
Yeah.
Dopamine's a whole nother rabbit hole that we'll get into. But to sort of summarize this, the blue light that we're getting is destroying the signaling that's happening within the body, because we need to have cortisol and melatonin in that very tight link with one another. And melatonin is what allows us to have the most restorative process in the body called autophagy. So when we go to sleep, we have 4 stages or 5 stages. We've got NREM 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we've got REM sleep. Now, as we go into REM sleep, we're getting a lot of brain consolidation, We're removing a lot of amyloid plaque, so it's really protective for Alzheimer's, and it allows us to have pretty much a clean slate in terms of toxin load in the lymphatic system, which is the brain's lymphatic system. Now, what happens is when we don't have sufficient levels of melatonin, we really struggle to go into that process of autophagy. The other benefit of autophagy is it is allowing mitochondria biogenesis to happen, which is where we essentially recycle and renew the mitochondria. So any mitochondria that become faulty or damaged, which in the modern world happens all the time because of our environment and because of our lifestyle and our choices, when they become faulty and they don't get regenerated through that autophagy process, again, chronic disease begins. We get fatigue, we get low energy, we start to get brain fog, we start to get issues like autoimmune conditions, and then eventually it leads to even more severe chronic health conditions after that. So when we're not getting that process happening at night, that recovery doesn't happen. So that already opens up the door to making us very prone to getting sick and having health issues. And based on the bloods that I look at, one of the most common signs that someone is deficient in melatonin without doing a salivary melatonin test is looking at their DHEA level. And when you look at their DHEA level, I'd say for the vast majority of people, unless they're young and they're quite healthy, I'm just ballparking here, but maybe 80 to 85% of people are deficient in DHEA, which is a sign that they're not getting sufficient autophagy, which is just another contributing factor to all the health issues that we're seeing.
Yeah.
This also fits into the cancer story as well, because autophagy is our most protective mechanism for oncogenesis, which is what essentially leads to cellular proliferation, because the cell has two options. It's either reproduce or it can divide by that perspective, or it can become immortal. And when it becomes immortal, that's essentially what is leading on to cancer. Now, autophagy allows us to stop this process from happening, and it's our body's natural way to prevent cancer from manifesting, but also just clear out all the cells in the body. So when we're not getting sufficient sunlight and we're not synthesizing melatonin and we're not getting autophagy, again, cancer detection within the body and the body's ability to fight off cancer through the immune system becomes majorly impacted. So again, now we can see people that tend to get skin cancer, because I know you want to talk about skin cancer at some point, they are deficient in vitamin D. And their vitamin D is a massive reflection of their immune function. And when you've got sufficient vitamin D levels, you're very likely that you're going to have sufficient melatonin levels as well. So that process is going to be working well in the body. So the last thing I'll say on the light side of things for blue light is the reason why it's such an issue is because all of the lights in our house, like all LED lights, they're really high on the blue light spectrum. So they suppress melatonin by up to 80%, which means that even if we've got that melatonin there, it's not going to get released sufficiently. So we're not going to go into that process that we need to. And it's not just blue light, it's pretty much any light once the sun goes down. Like we've got a little bit of a capacity to deal with more of the infrared spectrum. So fire obviously has been around for thousands of years and we've had that time period to adjust to it. But anything outside of that is essentially telling our body, hey, it's not actually nighttime, so you can't begin to turn on these processes.
Yeah, because that's what it essentially is. Like, even though you used all the scientific language, it's like your body is confused.
Yeah. So the body always wants to know what time is it and am I safe? Like that's the two main things that it's always thinking. Am I safe? What time is it? So,
it's like a needy little toddler.
Yeah, it's just like a little kid. So you've got to give it that constant reinforcement. And obviously we had a lifestyle in the ancestral period where we constantly gave it that input. We always told it what time it was because it always had the light frequency being received within it. Yeah.
And our body hasn't adopted, or our systems haven't adapted, for the modern world. Right, so we're still our system, our nervous system.
The lag for evolution, like it's not something that just changes over a couple generations. Like epigenetics can have more of like a short-term period in terms of the way that it's translated, but our biology right now is almost the exact same as it was 20,000 years ago.
That's wild.
Which is wild. Our lifestyle is 1% of what it was like 20,000 years ago.
And then we go, why am I sick?
But people don't even think about this enough. That's what I mean. Like, because of the way that the system has been created and the centralized system and the medical system, people don't even question this stuff. They just want to know, or if they're sick, they just want to go to the doctor and get a prescription so that they feel better and get some antibiotics. Or if their skin's bad, they do what I did when I was young and I didn't know any better, and go on Roaccutane for 18 months and destroy their gut microbiome and their immune system.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's so many different things that we can think about from that standpoint, but people think you're crazy when you tell them that you can heal by going and connecting to nature. Like that in itself, people think is woo-woo and so far out there. But again, they don't even understand the complexity behind the science and how our body really runs, which is why all of this that we spoke about precedes what's happening nutritionally or training-wise or like supplements or however you want to look at it. You need to have all of these foundations in place in order for those other areas to begin to balance out. And what happens most of the time is that when those foundations are in place, those things do balance out by themselves.
Yeah.
If someone's really severe and they've got a number of chronic health conditions, then obviously there's a lot more that you need to do on top of that to really get the needle moving. But for the vast majority of people that aren't dealing with those severe health issues, but just don't feel great, if they start to embody a life that's closer to the ancestral way of living, they're going to feel better and better and better. And like I said, it's programmed into us. Like going in the sun creates beta endorphin, which creates a feel-good sensation within the body. So that's the whole story. And the other side of it as well, with the mental health side of things, is if everyone's constantly getting that little input of beta endorphin into their system, telling them that you should feel good and that everything's okay, there's going to be far less anxiety and there's going to be far less depression. But the other pillar of that is dopamine. And dopamine is essentially the molecule of more in the body. And it is what we are, from a neurotransmitter perspective, mainly the most efficient in, because we're draining it all the time with blue light, because blue light depletes our dopamine reserves. And if you want to think about it from more of like an algorithmic perspective, social media, for example, and our attention span, that gets depleted as well. So when we're deficient in dopamine, we're usually going to be either depressed or we're just going to feel shit, because dopamine allows us to have the biochemistry we need in order to actually take action and do things. So we're all little dopamine addicts.
Dopamine sluts.
Exactly. And the way that chemistry works, like we just spoke about, it was designed to be doing what it was 20,000 years ago. It wasn't designed to have a blue light device that you can flick through 25 TikToks in a minute and then have all of this input just come into you and your system's like, holy shit, what's going on? And then you're doing that every single day. So eventually you just flatline to that level and you become unmotivated, you become lacking, like you lack energy, you get brain foggy, and then eventually you become depressed as well because you've disconnected so much and our reserves, they're not getting restored. So once you deplete that dopamine reserve that's there, you're constantly going to be looking like a little junkie for more and more and more and more.
Yeah. And that's what it is. Like when you get stuck in those scroll holes, it's like, I actually don't know why I'm scrolling, but I can't stop. And your body's like searching for that release of dopamine, that quick, cheap hit.
Exactly.
It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
And even like, I say this to my clients as well, we weren't created or like adapted to have all the information that we have. Right? Like when we lived in tribes, it was like 100, 150 people. You go online now and you've got access to thousands upon thousands of people's opinions and thoughts all getting jammed into you.
Exactly. Like, and through that, you think about how much time back then you had just to yourself. Like I'm probably a bit of a hypocrite for this because I have limited time for myself because I'm constantly taking information in and I'm constantly trying to learn and listen to stuff, which isn't a good thing, but I'm very almost competitive with myself in terms of learning. But through that process, what we had 20,000 years ago compared to now is we have a fraction of the time that we had back then to actually think and actually drop in and actually allow ourselves to process what's happening mentally. So we've become so clouded up here and there's so much chaos going on that of course we're going to feel irritable. Of course we're going to feel anxious because we've never actually processed the thoughts that are coming in. And as we know, there's thoughts that are ours, but then there's also thoughts that are other people's, and then there's thoughts that are different versions of us. And then if you want to think about it energetically, there's like thoughts that you can take from entities that are around you and from the other energetic field of other people, because we are frequency and we've got an energetic field that spans 64 feet 360 degrees around us. So I'm in your energetic field right now and you're in my energetic field. So naturally our frequencies are connecting, but through that process, I can be picking up some of your bad juju and you can be picking up some of my bad juju as well. So that there's so much that's going to cloud us. And if we don't spend that time to process it, I like to describe it to clients when I tell them to, I don't think meditation's necessary for everyone, because some people it's not the go-to, and some people you can do something that's more active. You can do breath work, you can go for a walk, you can jump, you can shake, you can exercise, whatever it looks like, but you need to be able to just drop in to the body and allow yourself to begin to process things. Because the way I describe it is you've got an email inbox that's subscribed to pretty much every single thing in the world. So you're getting all the bullshit marketing emails come in. You're getting all the spam, you're getting all the junk. You're getting a few, or maybe more than a few, but you're getting important ones come through. And you're like, holy shit, my inbox has 361,000 unopened emails from my 26 years of life. And I haven't spent more than 10 minutes beginning to open and process them. So now what you can do and the way you can think about it is every time you meditate or any time you go into a practice within, you're essentially opening up those emails.
I love that.
And then eventually the stage of enlightenment is when you get to zero on your inbox. And obviously you've got to unload what comes in through that day. But then eventually you're just present all the time, because all the thoughts that you've had that have consumed you or entered you, you've finally been able to process them.
And it's kind of like what happens to you as well in terms of trauma. Like maybe there's a big email there with a big attachment and you're like, oh, can't be bothered opening that now, or that feels too big. And then it still piles up. So it's like what's happened to you in your past, whether it's like big T trauma or little T trauma, you've actually got to process and open that email. I love this analogy so much. And open that email and actually go with it.
Yeah, exactly. And then you think about that with like clients and with the way that they feel. Like I love to say how you feel is subjective.
Yes.
How Caitlin feels now isn't how Caitlin used to feel 10 years ago.
It needs context.
Exactly. But Caitlin from 10 years ago, her baseline, which is let's say it's a 5 out of 10, she may have been really struggling back then. So for you to have her relative 5 out of 10, that might only be a 2 or 3 for you now. Yeah. But in the same sense, for someone who's sick 10 years ago, their baseline right now, that might be an 8 or a 9 out of 10 for them. So when you understand that, you know that your ability to feel better is essentially unlimited, because you're going to continue to be able to move up because it's relative, the way that you're feeling. But also, as you go on the journey, and you'll know this with clients as well, at the early stages, probably like the first month, everyone's riding high. They've just signed up. They're so excited. There's so much information. There's so many new changes, massive dopamine rush. And they're like, yes, this is sick. And they begin to feel better because the shit works that we talk about. Yeah. Like you feel better from it. But you then get to the point where it's almost like that stuff's sort of worn off. And it's like this facade that you were living for the last 10 years is gone. And then you go, holy shit, like I wasn't feeling good at all, or I'm still not feeling good at all. So you have like this little spike, but then that drops down. And the reason I think that's happening is because you're creating safety in your body. So all of that trauma that you've had built up for decades and decades begins to offload.
Yep.
And then eventually, like if you're not taught the tools to deal with it, it comes at you and you're like, fuck, I don't like this. And then exactly, you're razzled. So you're feeling way better than when you started, but you're now at the point where you've got more awareness of how you feel. So the grand scheme of things, you're like, fuck, I don't feel good at all. So now it's like the goalposts have shifted. And then through that process, that is where the actual work begins, because that's when you realize it's not just about doing 4 weeks of X, Y, and Z. It's about essentially working through a lifetime of poor choices or poor behaviors or poor habits. And again, it's not your fault because we're not taught this from a young age, but it makes you realize there's actually a lot of work that needs to go into this. Yeah. But the beauty of it is once you start the work, it's like the red pill. As soon as you're down that rabbit hole, or as soon as you're starting it, like there's no going back. Yeah. And slowly and slowly and slowly, like you're not going to make this massive shift to live this life all of a sudden if you haven't been living it, but you can slowly implement new things that are going to get you closer to it. And then eventually you just build up momentum, and it's like a snowball rolling down a hill.
Yeah.
And the faster it goes, the more snow it collects, the bigger it gets, and then it just grows from there.
Yeah. I think that's an important point as well, because I think people will see other people online especially and go, oh my God, they're fucking wearing blue light blockers and they're doing this and they're like synthesizing, whatever. And it's like, you haven't even stopped for a second, right? It needs to be a snowball effect. Like for me, it was meditation. And then 3 years later, it was breath work.
Yeah.
And then it's slowly been building and building and building into this, and it's going to keep building. But it's like, don't compare yourself to other people at different parts of their journey.
Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all you need to do. But understand that, like what you're explaining then, like there's even the spiritual side of things with that, and people that like fall into plant medicine, and psychedelics are incredible, and they have a really important role, especially for people that are really dealing with like PTSD or severe depression or severe mental health issues. But if you're just like, I want to become enlightened, and you think that that's going to be a shortcut to getting there, then you're in for a rude awakening because you're bypassing all the work that goes into it. And one of my really good mates, Tads, he's at the Czech Institute, and he's doing a Qigong practice.
Cool.
So he's doing 100 days straight of Qigong. I think he's he'd nearly be close to finishing it now. Last time I saw him, he was at 81. So I reckon he'd be around day 90. And he's just doing 20 minutes every morning with the Qigong, feeling and moving into the energy. And that in itself, like that is a real practice. That is you going deep, and that is you starting to connect with yourself. And he's even saying now he's getting signs and signals from his soul coming through when he's asking a question, or he needs an answer, or he needs his intuition to come through. So I guess the more alignment you create, the more like intuitive you become as well.
You're removing a lot of the noise.
Yep.
That's what I say to my clients, like working from a nervous system perspective as well. And like even in terms of blue light and like processed food and alcohol and vaping, it's all just like noise in the system. And so when you can take away things and you can remove things, and then you can do a practice like Qigong or meditation or breath work, you're allowing yourself to recenter and allowing that connection. But you can't have that connection if you're just fucking running from one thing to another, vaping, smoking, doing all the things.
Exactly. And the other part of that is like the way that the body feels. Like if the body doesn't feel safe, you're not just going to be able to be like, I want my trauma to be healed, or I want to bring up my trauma. Like you've got to create a place of safety within the body. And then you may not even need to do the crazy releases or the crazy techniques, because naturally, like I said, when you create safety in the body begins to work through the trauma that's there. And we see what animals do. Like when animals, like if a zebra gets chased by a lion for 2 or 3 hours, it's cortisol and it's adrenaline are through the roof. But then it gets to a safe space and it wigs out pretty much for like,
it shakes it off
5-10 minutes, and it clears out that energy.
Yeah.
But how many times does that happen to us? And biochemically, what's happening to us is what was happening 20,000 years ago. So it was us running away from a lion, or it was us fighting another tribe. And through that process, the stress response took over, and it gives all, like blood glucose goes up. And that's another thing. Blue light increases blood glucose as well. But blood glucose goes up. We're getting cortisol increased. We're getting adrenaline increased because we're ready to fight, or we're ready to flee, or we're ready to freeze. Like the stress response as it acts out. But through that process, it's not like it's on a continuum where it's happening. It's like it's fucking go time. Like it's life or death, this situation.
Yeah.
But the life or death situation is I'm running late to the podcast and I'm stuck in traffic, or I'm going to miss my flight tonight, or my boss messaged me this and I've got to get it done by the end of the day.
Or like, hey, we need to talk.
Yeah, shit like that. Yeah. Which it's, when you think about it, like there's just no way to conceptualize how the body's receiving that when it's so new to us. But think about that happening every single day. And think about that happening when you pick up your phone in the middle of the night, or you pick up your phone in the morning when you wake up, or you go to the toilet in the middle of the night and you turn on that big LED light that's overhead. So we're constantly getting that stress signal come into the body, and we're not doing anything to offload it, or very few people are. So it's building up. And then, as we know, stress suppresses the immune system, and then it's also going to suppress hormones as well and turn that off, because the body's like, if we're in a state of fight or flight right now, I'm not going to give you some prolactin and some luteinizing hormone and some follicle stimulating hormone for you to be able to create a baby.
Like, I'm running from this lion, man.
We're fucking struggling to stay alive just ourselves.
Yeah.
So if that isn't addressed, then like I said, it doesn't matter what herbal tincture you get or how strong the contraceptive pill is that you're taking or whatever you want to look at to balance out your hormones, it's just not going to happen. So that's why, if we come full circle, your body always wants to know, am I safe? And your body always wants to know, what's the time? And am I safe is going to come from both your environment, but also the thoughts that you're letting in. And what is the time is going to come from the signal that is around us. And what is the time changes, because it's not just light that gives us that input, it's food timing as well. It's temperature. So that's why cold exposure. And when we get away from the equator and when we've got different haplotypes, we've got the ability to adjust to colder climates better because the cold activates that pro-opioid melanocortin pathway. And that's essentially the pathway that Ozempic is working on as well. And it is a yoker of the superchiasmatic nucleus when UV light becomes low. So when you're sitting inside, this is how crazy it is. The norm, just think about how many things are going wrong right now. If I give you this example, you're sitting inside, right? So let's say it's like 7, 8 o'clock. It's starting to get dark. You're watching TV. It's hot outside, but you've got the aircon blasting.
Oh, it makes my skin crawl.
It's hot and you've got no top on, or you've got very limited clothing on. So all of the skin receptors are receiving the light that's coming from the TV. You're eating Uber Eats, whatever you want to call it, at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock. So all of those signals are telling your body that it's daytime right now, or it's not even close to the environment that you're actually in.
Yeah.
So that's the reality of it, and people think that they're doing everything right, which the system would make them think that they're doing everything right. Like if you're going to F45 in the morning and you're training at 6 a.m., you think you're doing right, but the reality of it is you're missing that vital window, you're increasing cortisol, you're around blue light, and the body by itself has its own preference to when you do things. And the sweet spot for training is actually between 2 p.m. and 5 or 6 p.m., which can vary a little bit based on where you're at and what time of the year it is. But the reality of it is most people are going to see that person going to F45 at 6 a.m. in the morning and say, you're a health freak.
Yeah, you're so obsessed. You're so healthy.
When in reality, if they just laid out in the sun for 2 hours instead of going to the gym, they're actually going to do a hell of a lot more for their health and for their cells within their body than busting their ass in F45.
And that's part of the problem, right? Because we're sold this idea of like, you need to get up early, you need to go to the gym, and then you need to go and sit in your office all day. And it's like this whole big systematic fuck around. And
even if you think about the wellness side of things, it's the exact same, because the culture around wellness culture, especially with morning routines, it's overkill. You don't need to wake up and journal and do an ice bath and do red light and then meditate and then do your lymph work and then fast and then whatever it is. Like your body only needs little inputs throughout the day, and those inputs need to be as close to what we would have got from an ancestral perspective in order for it to operate effectively. So the best morning routine you can do is wake up, go outside, get as much of your skin in the sun as possible, get your feet on the earth, drink some spring water, and do some lymph work or get the body moving with some light movement. That is all you need to do in the morning, and do it without anything around you. So don't do it while you've got YouTube playing or you're listening to TikToks or you're watching something. Do it in peace and connected to yourself and connected to the environment that you're in, and you're hitting all of the different birds with the one stone that you need to.
And it only takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Well, it takes as long as you want it to take, because the longer you can do it for, the better. So it's like, how long is a piece of string? That's always the main questions that I get when I do my questions on Insta are, how long should I ground for, or how long should I spend in the sun? And the answer is as much as you can, because we're constantly supposed to be connected to the earth, and we're constantly supposed to be outside with light spectrums hitting us, whether it's direct or whether it's reflected from plants around us.
Let's come back into the sun thing.
Yep.
Because I know that when I messaged you, I was like, I want to talk about the sun. Because there's been a thing going around on Instagram of like the tan line thing is bad and like that the sun causes cancer. And we've kind of briefly touched on it, but I know that we touched on all of the more like biologic things that are happening. So if we can simplify, because you and I are big little sun hosts, right? Like we love to be in the sun. We love a bit of a tan. When people say that there's nothing healthy about
Don't think about tan, think about melanin.
Yes.
So
let's go into there.
Well, let's just break down there's nothing healthy about a tan and reframe it to what they're actually saying is there's nothing healthy about melanin. Yeah? Because a tan is melanin. Tan is pigment in the skin and pigment in the skin is melanin. Now, melanin is incredible. It's got so many different functions. It can get really nerdy with like the bioenergetics of it and the quantum aspects of it. But then you can also, and the way that it's a semiconductor, so it's able to create light within us and reflect light within us and work with the mitochondria. And it's not just on our skin. We have the neuroectoderm, which allows melanin to interact with different organs within the body. So our brain has a lot of neuromelanin in there as well. And it's also around a lot of other elements within the body. So when we think about that perspective, it's way more than just, I want to look dark or I want to get a bit of color on my skin, because its function is it's essentially chelating heavy metals, which means that it's detoxifying for us. It's able to absorb the full spectrum of light. Now, when we think of light, it's not just the sun that's light, but EMF, non-native EMFs are also light. So X-rays, gamma waves, microwaves, they're all different aspects of the light spectrum, which is pretty cooked when you think about it, to try and conceptualize that. And then it's also got benefits around it essentially supercharges our immune system as well, because where we have the most amount of energy within the body or the most energy demands, we tend to have really high amounts of melanin in there. So the brain, for example, but also the gastrointestinal tract. And it's the reason why we have a lot of POMC that gets stimulated within the gut. It's the reason why you tend to get a lot of good color on your stomach when you go into the sun. So, and there's also a lot in the different sphincters in the body. So like the lower esophageal sphincter, which connects, sphincter is such a funny word.
Sphincter is such a funny word. I just like giggled like a little kid.
I know, sphincter.
Sphincter.
It connects the esophagus to the upper part of the stomach.
Yeah.
It is like that sphincter process is holding a heap of energy in order to keep its signaling operating well. So there's a heap of melanin in there. So there's actually like a sign of having issues around your melanin being degraded is that you're going, you're either not getting enough sun and you're around too much non-native EMF. So you're losing it, you're depleting it, you're degrading it. So non-native EMF breaks melanin down. We can break down melanin ourselves through the pathway of how it converts back into dopamine. So dopamine to L-DOPA to melanin, but it can also be broken down back the other way if we need dopamine. And dopamine is going to be a higher priority than synthesizing melanin in the body. So if you're low dopamine, I guarantee it's going to be very hard for you to tan effectively. And if you're doing things like being around a lot of blue light, a lot of non-native EMF, you're going to deplete that amount of dopamine that you have. So you're going to break down all of your melanin for that. But it's also got amazing benefits in terms of moving energy throughout the body. So when we think about that, it's a whole variety aside from just giving us color and protecting our skin. So the way that it protects our skin is it's being able to absorb the UV light that we're getting from the sun. Now, there's so many different, I guess, components to it, but the more UV light you get, the darker your skin is. So the higher you go up on the Fitzpatrick scale. So the Fitzpatrick scale, which goes from 1 to 6, 1 is like you're very fair skinned, 6 is you're very dark skinned, like Aboriginals would be 6. They're some of the darkest pigment humans in the world, but it's because they're exposed to super high levels of UV. So if you think about who is naturally designed to live in Australia, what do they look like?
Yeah.
Like the Aboriginals, they're very pigmented and they've got super high levels of UV, like UV tolerance within them. Now, what that means is they're able to capture really high amounts of energy that we have from the sun. So when we think about the mitochondria and how that operates, that is really important, because if we don't have the right amount of melanin within us to capture the light, our mitochondria can become overwhelmed. So that's just one reason in itself that it's not a good idea for you to all of a sudden jump into UV11 and lay in it for 2 or 3 hours, because your mitochondria are going to become overwhelmed. And it's a sign that it's happening if you feel really fatigued after you've been in the sun, because you haven't got that mitochondria efficiency that you need. So the mitochondria aren't able to structure the water as well, which can be from a number of different reasons. Like there can be a lot of reactive oxygen species, so oxidative stress that's going on. There can also be like high levels of deuterium in the mitochondria as well. So there is nuance around it, but the reality of it is as well, if you don't have a solar callus developed, which is essentially our natural way to deal with the sun and enhance the benefits of the sun, then you're going to have big issues there. So when we think about there's nothing healthy about a tan or there's nothing healthy about melanin, like you look at those people that don't go in the sun, they're usually the ones that have severe health issues that are going on, because they're not getting any of that POMC activation, which we spoke about earlier. They've got minimal amounts of melanin, so their bioenergetics inside and their water networks and their collagen networks are also impacted. And they're also not getting that frequency of light that they need to essentially prime the system to know what time it is. So the people that get sunburnt are usually the people that avoid the sun throughout most of the year, and then, like I said, get that super high dose of it in 1 or 2 days that they're not used to. So it overwhelms their system and they burn. So burning's never a good sign. Yeah, it's a sign that your body's not able to deal with the light frequencies that it's getting. What stops you from getting burnt is, like I said, when you get morning sun and you get that urocanic acid and you get filigrein produced in the skin is prepared to deal with the UV light that it gets exposed to later in the day. But on top of that, as you begin to develop more and more melanin, the melanin is able to capture that UV light and increase. So it begins to grow within you and it begins to hold that energetic charge within you a lot better than someone who has no melanin. Now, when we put sunscreen on, when we wear sunglasses, when we cover up, we completely disrupt this pathway. Now, the sunglasses are an aspect that people get confused by, but think about our eyes are essentially capturing light all the time. So if we are blocking the UV that's coming in, then the signal between the skin and the eyes becomes incoherent. On top of that, you put sunscreen on your skin, you're then blocking the skin's ability to capture that UVB light effectively and synthesize POMC. So that's why it's such an issue, because vitamin D levels obviously aren't going up, but all the benefits around POMC aren't happening either. So there's no stimulation of POMC. And then as we start to think about people like really reducing that aspect, and the melanin begins to degrade as well, and they're low dopamine because they're inside and they're around a lot of blue light, we've just got a massive storm that's occurring from all these different avenues. And that is where we start to talk about skin cancer happening, because what is happening with skin cancer is the melanocytes that we have in us that help with the synthesizing of melanin within the body. The priority of having melanin in the body is having it in those really high energy demanding areas, such as the brain, such as the gut, and such as the other organs. So if those organs and the neuroectoderm that we can think about, if that's deprived of melanin and we begin to degrade the melanin there, then the body's like, shit, we need this melanin. Yeah, like we're going to have big issues. Like that's a high priority for the body to address. So what it does is it sends the melanocytes to the extremities, like to the skin, to be able to capture the UV light, to pull it back into the body. So a good example of this is a guy named Ninja, who's a streamer. He's like the biggest Fortnite streamer there is.
Right.
And he's got a skin cancer I think it's on the bottom of his foot. So if the sun's causing that, tell me how that's happening.
How?
So he'd be obviously getting minimal sun. He'd constantly be bombarded from blue light. So his synchronization of the eye and the skin in terms of its ability to receive the light frequencies becomes interrupted because of the way that vitamin A gets impacted, and DHA, which is a whole nother story, gets destroyed when we're around a lot of blue light. And then we're also, like we spoke about earlier, depleting or not even having melatonin. So the restoration that we get throughout our sleep and the breakdown of these potentially cancerous cells doesn't happen. And then vitamin D is going to obviously not be non-existent because we're not getting anything to synthesize it either. So people that get skin cancer are usually deficient in vitamin D, and that's based on a conventional standpoint. Based on a functional standpoint, I guarantee they're all deficient, because the functional standpoint is nearly 2.5 times the top level of what they consider, what they consider the baseline. So let's say, I think it's 50 nanomoles per deciliter here. I want to see that at least 125 nanomoles per deciliter.
Yeah.
It's 2.5 times what the baseline is from the conventional standpoint. So they're definitely vitamin D deficient, to put it simply. The other thing that's really interesting, and there's studies on this, I put them up on my Instagram, is that people that work outdoors have a lower incidence of skin cancer and melanomas compared to those that work indoors.
Interesting.
Yep. There's also really strong correlations between blue light exposure and melanomas as well. And then there's, to make it even more simple, there's longitudinal studies that are looking at it. So like meta-analyses as well, which are studies that are looking at a whole bunch of studies that correlate the less sun you get, the shorter your life will be. And the more sun you get, the longer your life will be, to really simplify it for people. Now, when they look at it in an acute setting, they're telling you that UV light is causing skin cancer. Now, UV light is never present in isolation in nature. Never. We never just get UV light from the sun. We always get infrared light from the sun as well. And we always get infrared light even when UVB light isn't present. So the infrared light is incredible in terms of what it does in the body. It creates that structured water we spoke about earlier, and it essentially allows our mitochondria to run as effectively as possible. And our mitochondria are all over the body.
Yeah.
I should have said that earlier.
Powerhouses, batteries.
Yeah, think about like simplified ways, like they're like the powerhouse of the cell. They do so much more than that, but that's just like enough of an understanding to make sense with it. Now, when that's happening, and we're getting that limited amount of sun, we're not getting that infrared light stimulus either. So the infrared light is creating the structured water within us, which is allowing all of the like incredible quantum functions and the electrons to be moving around the body, which is obviously going to have protective effects, but it's going to optimize our ability to synthesize melanin, and it's going to optimize our ability to really enhance and capture the benefits of the sun that we're getting throughout the day. So that's vital. And like I said, the other factor is that people aren't getting that early morning sun either. So they need to do a study to say what is the prevalence of skin cancer when somebody, and again, they can't do this because you can't control for all the variables that are here. Yeah, but they do control for a specific variable, which is UV light in isolation. But I'm even confident to say that if somebody is following all these practices and they're still doing these tests around UV light exposure, it's still going to be way less when you're consistently getting sun. And that's another thing, like intermittent sun exposure and consistent sun exposure. So getting sun exposure regularly, that is correlated with the lower prevalence of skin cancer as well. And a really wacky one is sunburns are actually associated in the study. I think it was sunburn. I can't remember what the other two were, but the study is on my Instagram. Yeah. Sunburn was correlated with a lower prevalence of melanomas as well.
That's really interesting.
That's really interesting. So there's all of the light side of things. Yeah. There's obviously the stress side of things as well, because if someone's super stressed and they're in that sympathetic dominant state, they're going to create a lot more reactive oxygen species in the body. So their mitochondria are going to become less effective. They're going to degrade their melanin. So their protective mechanisms are going to be downplayed as well. And then if you think about we can include nutrition here. We can think about their nutrition as well. If they're eating foods that are incoherent with their environment, so let's say they're eating, and again, it's not really a good example because you're not going to have UV light exposure during the middle of winter. But if you consistently eat mangoes in Victoria every time of the year, you're creating a hell of a lot of reactive oxygen species within the mitochondria, which essentially just means stress and inflammation on a cellular level. So when we pair that with then seed oils, which everyone is full of these days, and our omega-6 to 3 ratio is dramatically altered, our DHA levels are also dramatically altered and deficient compared to what we need. It's crazy when you think about how much DHA we need in the body and how little people get and how much people fear seafood for heavy metals, which is just crazy because seafood has selenium and has iodine, which is protective against heavy metals anyway. Another rabbit hole. But as you can see, there's like so many different factors at play that would make you prone to getting cancer that have nothing to do with the sun. Like, it's not the sun's fault. The sun hasn't changed. Yeah. We've changed. And our ability to, and when I say we've changed, we haven't actually changed either, but our lifestyle and our environment locally and what we do on a day-to-day level has changed massively. So through that process, we've lost our ability to be able to connect to it and receive all the amazing benefits and essentially take in the light frequencies that we need to. And a really simple thing to think about is like, is our skin designed to have sunlight hit it, or is our skin designed to have sunscreen on it?
I'm going to answer. Sunlight.
But people, yeah, exactly. But people make more sense of thinking, oh yeah, I should put sunscreen on, I should put sunnies on, than what nature intended and how we evolved to be here. Like, you think about life, the only way life evolved is from the sun.
Yeah.
So that in itself would tell you that it's probably not bad for you.
And every other creature or living thing, plants, food, whatever's grown, needs the sun.
Yep, exactly.
Yep. Why are we the only things that don't?
Yep.
Apparently.
Yep. So, and then there's the fear side of it as well. So just the whole fear aspect in itself, like, we know fear is a vibrational state that's going to create so many changes epigenetically, but also on that cellular level in the body. So being in fear is going to make you more prone to getting cancer, definitely. So if you have that belief by itself, you're already increasing the prevalence of skin cancer, because fear in itself is putting you in a state for that to begin to manifest too. And you can think about how that dynamic works, and then again, how the medical industry works and dermatologists. And if you want to think about the bigger picture, like even Bill Gates is talking about wanting to block the sun, like Mr. Burns in that Simpsons episode.
That's fucked.
But it's because it opens up the door for saying, now we can put you on a new prescription for the rest of your life. And it's, I believe the majority of it is all profit-based on that perspective. And you will see like people come out of the centralized system, and even people high up in the centralized system, that talk about how corrupt it is and how they're suppressing information. But when you really simplify it, the reason they're doing that is because to heal, it's so much more simple than what you think. And by them complicating it, it's disempowered you and made you think, oh fuck, I need to go to the doctor and get this prescription, or I need to go to the chemist and get this sunscreen in order to be healthy.
Yeah. Well, what's that saying? It's like a cured patient is a lost patient.
Yep.
Right. So
exactly.
It's not a healthcare system.
No. Right? It's a profit system.
It's a profit system.
And the more we can try and disconnect from that, which is like what you and I do and what all other decentralized practitioners do, the better it's going to be. And compare the people that see us and the people that go to the centralized system, and let's just do a little competition and see who gets better results for their patients or for their clients. Yeah. And it won't even be close. Yeah. But it comes back down to what's the root cause, and like we said, what are those two things that the body's always thinking? What time is it?
And am I safe?
And am I safe? And if those two things aren't addressed, or those two things are in strife, then there's going to be issues that are going to manifest further down the stream.
Mm-hmm. And I think even just if someone's listening to this, asking yourself that can be really, really powerful. So if you're listening to this in the car, or you're at work, or wherever you are, it's like, what time is it? What time does your body actually think it is?
Yep. Because
right now we're in Alex's beautiful studio, but my body doesn't know what time it is. Like it doesn't actually know whatever the time it is. But based off the lighting that we've got around us, it's sending a confused signal.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other thing to think about though is just there's got to be a bit of common sense at play as well, which is very rare to find these days. Like, we're not telling you to go out and lay in the sun for the whole day and get bright red and burnt. No. We're telling you to respect the laws of nature. And that's what I love to say. If you go against the laws of nature, you've got to prepare to suffer the consequences. But if you align yourself with the laws of nature, you're going to feel fucking awesome. So think about that when you're starting to make these decisions. Like, you can't just cold turkey it. You've got to gradually build yourself up to sun exposure. And like, even for me, like when I was little, always in a rash vest, always covered in sunscreen, bucket hat, beach shoes, sunglasses, the works. And yeah, and I could be in the sun for like 15, 20 minutes in summer, maybe like 5-6 years ago, and I'd probably get burnt after that.
Yeah.
Now I can lay in the sun. Like the other day I laid in the sun probably for 6 hours, and it was UV 11 or UV 12. And I did look pink, but the reason I looked pink is because all my red blood cells were coming to the surface for the nitric oxide, which is a really good thing. And the next day I was brown as anything. And I used to never be able to tan. But understand that, like we said, the ability for you to tan depends on what's happening with dopamine, and it depends on what's happening with the other cofactors that we need for the synthesis of melanin. And it also depends on your environment and your DHA stores and the non-native EMF exposure that you're getting as well. So when you get those things in place, then you're going to see the results happen. But you're really going to struggle to do that if you live in an apartment building in the city and you go outside for a few hours and you lay in it, but then you go to bed and, like we spoke about, your energetic field's 64 feet, 360 degrees. So the 3 people above use Wi-Fi routers and the 3 people below use Wi-Fi routers, and then everyone else around you that's impacting you and disrupting the electrical signaling that's happening while you sleep. That's going to really impact what's happening on a cellular level. So it's going to be harder for you to tan, and you'll notice that. And Rick Rubin talks about it in the Huberman podcast with Jack Cruz, and he says every time that he flies, he notices that he loses melanin because flying is a very stressful event and there's a lot of non-native EMF, and we're obviously exposed to a lot more radiation being closer to the sun. So through that process, the body's pulling in that melanin as a protective mechanism for all of the organs inside that need it.
That happens to me when I get back from Bali. It just goes,
yep.
And then I'm like,
but you'll notice if you nail all the other areas, that is going to be very minimal. What's happening from that perspective.
It's so crazy. It's so interesting. I like to explain, I know you briefly touched on this, but like the solar callus idea, I explain it to my clients. Like, imagine if you went into a gym for the first time and you tried to bicep curl 100 kilos. Yeah. Couldn't do it. It would be fucked. Like, your body would get so confused. And I think that's the same thing with sun exposure.
Exactly. And think about like the seasonality of it as well.
Yeah.
Is it doesn't just go from winter to UV 12. Like, the UV gradually gets reintroduced and it gradually begins to build up throughout the year. So your exposure and your tolerance is able to be coherent with your environment. But like I said, if you're disconnected from nature and you're just waiting for those really hot summer days to go into it, then you're not getting that solar callus developed. So like you said, you're going into the gym and you're trying to bicep curl 100 kilos, and then you're tearing your bicep tendon, and you might even dislocate your arm doing it as well. But on the same lens, you're getting burnt and you're blistering and peeling for the next 2 weeks because you've been severely burnt, because it's the exact same analogy in terms of your body's not adapted to what it's receiving. Yeah. And the same thing's going to go for if you're in Melbourne in the middle of winter and then you fly to Bali for 2 weeks and you think you can just lay out in the sun. Now, there's ways to work around it, and that POMC pathway allows us to still generate alpha MSH and melanin. And that's why you look at like the Eskimos who are in really cold environments, they're still tanned because of that POMC activation. So when we are in winter, we actually need to embrace the cold. And the cold is our superpower for those of us that come from a longer latitude in terms of our haplotype. So from those of us who are from Northern European ancestry, we've got the superpower of the cold that allows us to maximize our environment when UV light is minimized. But if you're from like an equatorial region, like Tyra, for example, is from like her grandma, and your mitochondrial haplotype is passed down from the mother's side of the family. So your mum, her mum, her mum, her mum, and it just keeps going back from there. So her grandma's from Papua New Guinea. So she's got a haplotype that is accustomed to being in an equatorial region. So she can't handle the cold and she can't get the benefits from cold the same way I can. Interesting. But because we've moved away from the equator and our mitochondrial haplotype has evolved, we are able to harness the power of the cold, but we're still able to harness the power of the sun at the same time. And if we move to the equator and started living at the equator, over time, our mitochondria would begin to go back to the haplotype that it once was when it was in that region.
Cool.
Hectic.
The body is so smart.
And another thing on melanin is like melanin is what, like if you look, and it's really high in like fast twitch muscle fibers. So if you look at who's the fastest man on earth?
I actually don't know that.
Usain Bolt has got the world record, fastest man on earth. Very, very melanated. Yeah?
Yeah.
A lot of the best athletes in the world are darker skin. They're more Fitzpatrick 5, Fitzpatrick 6. Best athlete. Like you look at all the NBA players, like all the athletic ones, there's no white guys that are super athletic. There's a few, but they're very rare. Yeah. Whereas the majority are all the black guys because they're super high in melanin. And melanin allows us to have more energy in those fast twitch muscle fibers.
Wow.
So there's nothing healthy about a tan.
I fucking love that. I think that that's a really nice place to finish because we have been yapping.
Yeah, we've been cooking. I mean, there's so much more to talk about. But as I said, if you can simplify it, just think about what your ancestors live like and think about how you can replicate that. And it's not as big a deal as if you are someone who's in the city, like I said, on an apartment building. If I'm telling you all this, it's going to be so overwhelming. If you're going in, working a 9 to 5 and you can't even see the sun from where you live, but think about what is the first step that you can put in place to begin to get that snowball to build and build momentum and then start to work from there. So instead of you driving, maybe you walk to work and you leave a little bit earlier so you get that morning sun and you're able to be outside. Or think about what you're doing in terms of your own local environment. Like if you're thinking about the non-native EMFs, like I saw a massive 5G tower, like probably 200 meters away from us. If I'm just thinking about that, that's creating a lot of stress within me. But if I can think about, I've got my phone here, let's pretend I'm sleeping here. I've got my phone here, I've got a Wi-Fi router. I can turn the Wi-Fi router off. I can turn my phone off as well. And I can reduce the load that's relevant to me. So think about everything that's in your control and make that a priority first. And then over time, that's when you begin to make bigger changes. And then ultimately, as you go through this process and as you start to feel better and as you start to go, holy fuck, this works, I want to tell more people about it, you're going to have a big awakening and you're probably going to be like, I hate my job, hate where I live. And then because you feel so good that you've been practicing all this, you've got the energy mentally and physically to be like, fuck it, I'm going to move out of the city. I'm going to go live by the beach. Or I'm going to change. I'm not going to work this shitty 9 to 5 that I don't care about. And I'm going to go into the health space. Or I'm going to go into a completely new line of work that aligns with what I believe in and my energy. So the more alignment that you can make, but start off with what is the lowest, like what is the biggest needle mover, which I said is morning sun. Put those habits into place. Like you got to be able to you got to be able to crawl before you walk, and you got to be able to walk before you run.
Yeah.
And most people want to just run straight away without crawling or without walking and building up. So yeah, I think that's really important because it can become overwhelming. And I mean, the science of this is so complex and there's so much to learn, but the reality of what you need to implement is so simple and so basic.
Yeah.
Think about the laws of nature, think about how you respect them, think about how you follow them, and you cannot lose from there.
Yeah. And I also say as well, remove the shit first. Like I have that analogy of like if you have a cup full of mud and you put honey in it, it doesn't automatically taste like honey, right? You need to clear the shit out first. So if it's a matter of buying blue light blockers or just turning your fucking lights off, turn your lights off.
Exactly. And also think about what you said before or what we spoke about with the mindset side of things. Like open up the emails before you go and do some psychedelics or you go and do a 3-hour breathwork journey.
Yeah.
Like how about you just spend 10 minutes sitting outside first?
Yeah, just go and look at some trees first.
Go within. The answers are within.
Yeah.
And the more you do that, the more your intuition comes through as well.
Yeah.
But it's all connected. That's the biggest takeaway. It's all connected. It's the balance. It's the yin. It's the yang. It's the masculine. It's the feminine. And it's those foundational pillars that bring everything together so that you can then start to think about, okay, how can I now optimize this or how can I level it up? Yeah. But if those pillars aren't in place to begin with, then you've got your priorities in the wrong basket.
Yeah, I fucking love that. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun. We cooked.
well and truly cooked.
Yeah.
If people want to find you and connect with you, where can they do that?
They can find me at jordandavey.com.
Cool.
Jordan_Davey on Insta. That's where I put a lot of stuff. And then the Real Health Talk podcast with the great man, Zachy.
Zach.
Who's been on here and who's a fucking legend. So yeah, that's it.
Yay, love that. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
If you love this episode, don't forget to rate it 5 stars and share it with someone you love, and slide into the DMs with any takeaways or any comments.